Most people today grow up in cities. And if you grow up in a city, you don't really know what darkness is because there are street lights. So the darkest it ever gets is quite bright. As children, we used to have cookouts, campfires, bivouacs in camp. And that was the closest we ever got to real darkness, because you go out into a park, into a forest, and the nearest lights could be, 1,000 feet away or 2,000 feet away, and it's dark, and all you have is the campfire, the fire of the light of the fire, and the stars and the moon on a clear night. And you experience darkness, and it's quite intriguing. It's enchanting to see the stars. It's beautiful to see the stars for the first time in your life, and so on. And I recall as a child going to such a campfire and turning on a flashlight. When you turn on a flashlight in real darkness, there's a beam of light. But I also noticed that the beam of light was full of these tiny little particles that made the beam dirty. All these little tiny pieces contaminated what would have been a perfectly beautiful beam of light. And in my childhood imagination, I envisioned being able to get a vacuum cleaner and to suction out of my little beam all those little pieces, and I would have particle-less light, pure light, a beam of light. What I didn't know then is, of course, that if I would successfully remove those little tiny floating particles that I witnessed in my beam, the light would disappear as well. There would be no light. Because as all of us know, light is energy, it's electricity, that is transformed into heat and into light because it's conducted, because it's reflected off some kind of a surface, or it's translated from a current of electricity into an actually used up force of energy. In other words, light shines because it bounces off something else, some kind of a reflector, some kind of a recipient, some kind of a receiver, some kind of a vessel. If you take away the keli, you take away the particles, if you take away the reflectors, the light disappears. Not because there isn't any light, but because the light remains in its hidden state. And theoretically, light could go on and on and on and on forever, unless it hits some kind of a surface which translates it into heat and light and uses it up. It'll just keep going. Tonight's class is about Keilim, about vessels. We spent a lot of time talking about oiris, about light, about godliness, and about the idea that light is a reflection of the source, and that light reveals the source, and light is attached to the source. And as I've mentioned on a previous occasion, if you could have a conversation with Ein Sof, you would find him to be very boring. He has only one thing to say: meet my source. There's no I in godliness. And we focused on the oir, on the light aspect of godliness. Tonight we're going to talk about the vessel aspect of godliness. In the Maamar, it's not called Keilim, which is the classic term, it's called oisius, letters. There may be some differences between the word ois and the word kli and the word lavush, but to us it's not significant, or at least not that significant. Though the Perek that we read last week, and we're going to read this week and next week and probably the week after, all use the terminology oisius, but for the most part, oisius and Keilim are interchangeable terms. What they mean are entities, bodies of which light, in this case godly light, godliness reflects. If there is no keli, there is no oir. If there's no vessel, there is no light. Now, of course, that's a misnomer. If there is no vessel, there is light, but there's no revelation of light. Gilui oir has to be against what's called a zulas, something which is other than light. And the zulas, in this case, is keli, is oisius, is a vessel, is a body of which the light reflects. Now, all of us who are familiar with Chassidus and have learned it and tried to understand it, at a certain point in our learning life, ask the question, so exactly what are Keilim? What does it mean that it's a gavul, and it's a lakus, and it's a nifrad, and it's a nivdal, and it's a nelam, and it's a mischalek, and it's a lakus? These are very difficult questions to answer. And of course, a lot of time and energy goes into explaining Keilim. But what we find in the Maimori Hasidus, in the Hasidic writings, is that there's so much more discussion on oil than on kli. There's so much more discussion on the light half of the godliness equation, and so much less discussion on the vessel aspect of the godliness equation, that one of the questions which is often left unanswered is the question of what are vessels? Keilim, where do they come from? How do they function? What are their dynamics? We know so much about godliness. Godliness has no metzius. It's simply a reflection of the source. It must always be attached to the source. Because of attachedness to the source, it carries the source within itself, and it ain't soft, and on and on and on. What about the vessels? I remember distinctly being in yeshiva. I was 16 years old, and I was very innocent. I was probably a pretty good boy at that point in my life, but I was trying to understand what Keilim were, and I asked my mashpia, who was a very prominent mashpia, what are Keilim? So he says to me, Keilim are vessels that conduct light. I said, where do they come from, and how do they function? And I asked what I thought were simple questions, and we went around and around in a circle. At a certain point, my mashpia said to me very plainly, Du wilt, ich soll dir weglegen die Keilim auf den Tisch. Would you like me to take the vessels of Atzilus and put them for you on the table? And I said yes. And everybody laughed, and the conversation was over. I want to begin tonight's class with an overview, with a discussion on Keilim, on how vessels work and operate. So let's approach this systematically from the beginning. We know, because we learn in Svarim and in Chazal and in Chassidus, that before God Almighty created a world, He created a blueprint. A diutagma, pinkesois v'difterois. A sample model, or if you will, a paper draft of what would become creation. And this blueprint of the creation is the Torah. Like it says in the Zohar, Estakel be'eraiso bora alma. God Almighty looks into the Torah and created the world. And if one has sufficient wisdom, they can extrapolate backwards by observing the world to know godliness. Like it says in some Maimorim, if you understand the density and the mass and the nature of the sphere of the earth, you can understand a lot of things about Malchus of Atzilus, because the physical earth is in the image of Malchus of Atzilus. In other words, the Torah is the blueprint of the world. And there's something about Torah which we must know. And that is that Torah is a reasonable book. Torah is Chochmas Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the wisdom of God, which means, although God Almighty Himself is Nimna HaNimnois, God is not bound by the limitations of reason, but He created reason as a basis for how He's creating His world, and I'm sure there's many different reasons why God Almighty chose to do this. And in the image of the highest level of reason, which is the reason found in Hashem's holy Torah, He created all of Seder Ishtalshlos, all the worlds and all the creations that live within those worlds, and all the subsequent levels of reason which are predicated, which are based on the reason found in the Torah. In other words, although Hashem Himself, God Almighty Himself, is beyond Havana Vasaga, you can't explain Hashem, God, because He's higher than reason, but the Torah we can understand. And the Torah is logical. Now, it must always be remembered that Torah is only logical once logic was created. In other words, ultimately, the beginning of Torah is God. And inasmuch as the beginning of Torah is God, when you ask the question, why is logic this way? And the answer is because this was His will. The Rebbe once had a conversation about the Maamar from Sefer Yetzirah. Eser v'lei teisha, eser v'lei achad aser. There's 10 spheres and not 9 spheres. 10 spheres and not 11 spheres. Why? So there's many explanations. The Rebbe spoke to Sicha Vayetzi Tashim Memches, the Sicha about the Sefer of Derech Hamunah from the Bala Mechaber Sefer Avedis HaKedesh. The Rebbe spoke on the Even-Esser spheres. And the Rebbe said there's so many explanations for why the number 10 was chosen. Logical reasons. But in the end, all those logical reasons are predicated on something higher than logic. God decided 10, period. When God decided 10, He made logic to conform to that decision. The reason it makes sense to us that 10 is the ideal number for spheres is because since God decided that He wants 10 spheres, and that decision is a will decision, higher than reason, and God created wisdom or intelligence reason in the spirit of those wills, of that will. Therefore, it became logical why there should be 10 spheres and not 9 spheres, not 11 spheres. There are a number of sichas from the Rebbe which make this a point. So let me give you another example. And that is that according to Kabbalah, all of creation is comprised of two components. I think that according to the Hemshech Ayin Beis, there's a third component, but we're not going to go in the direction of Hemshech Ayin Beis. Let's learn the standard version, the standard model. And when you study Chassidus, of course, which is based on Kabbalah, you learn that God Almighty created everything, created the whole creation on two principles. And these two principles exist on all levels of Hishtalshalos, but the names changed. In Atzmus, we call it Yecholte Lahoyer and Yecholte Shaloi Lahoyer, the possibility to shine light and the possibility to not shine light. On the lower level of Giluyim, but Lifnei Tzimtzum, we call it Koyach HaBeli Gevul and Koyach HaGevul, the power in the realm of infinite and the power, or the possibility and potential in the realm of finite. After the Tzimtzum, we call it Kav and the Shimu, the ruled measure of light, and the Shimu means the trace, the source of the vessels, which we're going to be discussing in a later class. And then, of course, in Hishtalshalos, we call it Oides and Keilim, light and vessels. God chose to create His world with two tools. Why not 17? Why not 104? Why not 1? Why not 3? Why not 7? And the answer is Shtayim v'lo Shloisha, Shtayim v'lo Arba. This is what He wanted. Once you have that premise, that God Almighty decided to create everything with these two basic tools or building blocks, there's logic to why there has to be two. One wouldn't be enough, and 3 would be a crowd, if you will. But this is not relevant to us, and I'm not really answering the question seriously. I'm just saying it to you, so to speak, casually as an option, as a possible interpretation. And these two building blocks of creation are equal and opposite in every way. And they are light and vessels, all the way to the levels where light and vessels exist as oneness with Hashem, to the level where light and vessels are only a possibility, a theoretical possibility within Atzmas Saint Baruch. And in every way, they're equal and opposite. In every way, every idea you have in the light, you have in the vessels. But the way light and the vessels operate is opposite in every single aspect. I'm going to say Hebrew words and not explain them. Oir is dveikus, and gilui, and beli gevul, and achtos. Keli is havdalah, is helem, and havdalah, and is chalkus, and gvul. They're opposite systems. Light is designed to remain connected. And because it's designed to remain connected, and the source with the capital S is one, the light is one as well. Vessels are designed to be separate. First of all, separate from the source, and secondly, separate from one another. Every vessel is a separate vessel. Like, for example, to use the Sefer Yetzida's model. How did the Sefer Yetzida describe light and vessels? They compare it to having 10 red-hot coals. If you have 10 coals and range them in a straight line, or burning coals, burning embers, or in 3 columns, and you blow on those 10 coals, flame emerges from the coals, how many flames do you have and how many coals do you have? The flames immediately become one, because that's the nature of light. It was designed to be in a state of unity and attachedness. The 10 coals, although they are whispering coals, they're very, very hot, and they're halachically, in effect, pieces of fire, but you have 10 pieces, because that's the nature of vessels. It's designed to be distinct from the source, distinct from one another. And this difference between light and vessels is far more complicated and far more sophisticated and far more subtle than it initially appears. And I'll explain to you how. Okay? What happens if you have a small light and a bigger light, and you put the small light near the bigger light? A small flame near a big flame. The smaller flame will join with the big flame. But you won't have 2 flames, a little one and a big one. You'll have 1 flame. if that flame will join with a higher flame, you won't have two flames, you'll have one. In other words, the nature of light is that when you include one light with another light, you don't now have two lights, you have only one light. Moreover, when light returns to its source, you have only source. You don't have source plus light, you have only source. Because light is simply the reflection of the source. And in the source, there is source itself, so there's no need for the reflection. And when light reflects its source, it is nothing more than the reflection of the source. That's all. If you have a hard time fathoming what I'm saying, I'll give you a very simple example. Take a simple logical idea. 1 plus 1 equals 2. It's a very simple idea, yeah? 2 minus 1 equals 1. Are those two concepts or one concept? I suppose in the first grade there are two different ideas. 1 plus 1 equals 2 is one idea, which you can demonstrate to a child by putting one block on top of another. 2 minus 1 is 1 is a separate idea. You can teach it to the child, also demonstrated by taking a block away from a block, and they're distinct. As that child ages, two ideas merge, they become one. The child sees the inverse nature of addition and subtraction and multiplication and division, and it's not different ideas, it's one idea. Moreover, 1 plus 1 equals 2, and 2 plus 2 equals 4, and 4 plus 4 equals 8, and so forth are also the same idea. And as our mind expands, ideas which in an earlier stage were distinct join and become more and more unified. The deepest intellectuals see incredible intellectual unity. Intellectual unity doesn't only mean relationships between the things in the universe, but a relationship between the thoughts and the ideas in the universe. Like I've mentioned to you in an earlier class, I believe that Rebbe started by a Fabrengen. That the Rogatchover Gaon said, Kol ha-Teira kula nekuda achas. The whole of the Teira is 1 point. And he added, but to me it's 10 points. Implying that if he was even on a higher level than he was, he would see more unity than the reduction of all the thousands and thousands of ideas of Teira. To 10 points, that it'd be reduced, not to 10, but to one single point. In other words, when you grow intellectually, smaller ideas show unity with bigger ideas and they disappear. It's not you have in your mind 1 plus 1 is 2, and 2 minus 1 is 1, but now that you've gotten smarter, you see them as unified, but that someplace they remain separate. The nature of ideas, like light, is that when you join one idea and another idea, they become one. When you join one light and another light, they become one. But words and vessels are not that way. The number one and the number one that created the number two, and the number two and the number one which created the number one, in subtraction don't disappear. The idea is one, but the words, the building blocks, the coals are always separate. And this is a very deep difference between how Oyed functions and how Keilim functions. Oyed comes from a source, and the source is with a capital S, the source is God. In the source there's only source. Out of the source, the light is simply a reflection of the source. When you reduce the light and have a lesser light, or you have a variety of different lights, like the colors of a rainbow, you have a variety of different lights. But when you rejoin those lights, you don't have a combination of different lights, you simply have unity. In vessels, that's never the case. According to Kabbalah, and this is discussed at length in Chassidus, the source of every vessel, of every letter, of every world of Ishtalshalus, including the conversation that you and I are having at this moment as I speak to you, are rooted in Atzmos Mahus. Every single vessel, every single word, every single distinct aspect of a vessel is created and exists in the essence of God Almighty Himself. To quote the Lashon which is brought in Chassidus, and I actually saw it tonight as I was preparing this class, and I looked up the Mittel Rebbe's version of our Maamar, which is printed in the end of Maamar Lehavin Mah Vayikra Chelik Beis, and if you have time, I advise you to look it up. He uses the expression "Hanefesh Malaya Oisius." The soul is filled with letters. In the very essence of godliness, and the very essence of the soul, every letter, spoken and thought and imagined and envisioned, and on and on and on and on, understood and felt and willed and delighted in, exists distinctly in Atzmos. In other words, in God, there's light. But as light exists in God, there's only God. As the light of godliness exists in Moed, in this source, there's source. But in addition, there's another idea. In Atzmos and Hus, you have the possibility for Oisius, for all letters. And every one of those letters in Atzmos is a distinct letter. And when those letters emerge and they come down through Ishtalshalos to show themselves at a particular point in Ishtalshalos, when it's their turn to be revealed and to be manifested, to be separated out and so forth, they are revealing their identity, they're revealing their separateness. And again, as I said to you before, separateness has several aspects. Separateness from the source and separateness from every other letter. But the real root of that separateness is Atzmos Moshe Zavarach. In other words, light produces babies. What's the baby of light? A smaller light. Just like what's the baby of a big idea? A little idea. And that little idea is nothing other than a reduced or a partial version of the greater idea. That does not exist in words, it does not exist in vessels, doesn't exist in anything which has to do with the separateness, half of creation. Helam and Havdalah and Hischalkus and Agbola. Every distinct aspect was created distinctly in Atzmos Moshe. Accordingly, we use different language to describe light and its relationship to its source, and vessels and oisias and the relationship to their source. And I haven't seen this in too many places in Chassidus, but I saw it in Shua Samachei, and once is enough. When we talk about Elokus, oir, light, and the link between light and the source, we use words like Etzem and Ispashtus, Helam and Gili, Hiyuli and Gili. These are three different levels. The beginning of Seich Chelek Havayim Beis, which is based, of course, on the Imre Bina, discussed this by Arichas. Etzem and Ispashtus means the source and light. Hiyuli and Gili means a potential for light and revelation of light. Helam means light in a hidden state versus Gili, which means light in a revealed state. In all three of these models, and there are three very similar but distinct concepts, when the light which is revealed is included in the source, you don't have a revealed light hidden, you have hidden light. Because light functions, you can't even use the word fluid, it functions like light. Light and the source is source. Now remember, we don't mean here physical light, chemical light, because light physically is energy. It's not light at all. We mean metaphysical light, spiritual light. As I explained to you in one of the earlier classes on this series, I believe in considerable detail and quite at length, so I'm not going to repeat it here. But that's how light functions. When you join a light and a light, you have one light. You put light into a source, you have only a source. Vessels, the language which is employed to describe the relationship between a manifest vessel and a manifest letter, ois, versus how it's hidden, is klal prat, a general and a specific. And of course, the Maamar Chazal, ein bechlal ela masha befrat. The general rule, the klal, consists of a variety of prat. And the way I understand it, the message here is that vessels, words, since this shiur started, I have said, I don't know how many words. Every one of those words and every one of those letters, God Himself created in Atzmos Moshe. And as I utter it, I'm revealing a possibility which was created in the beginning of time that is distinct. And if a person will repeat 100 times my words, each time they will be revealing new letters, new words, new vessels, because vessels and words don't have babies. Each one has to be created directly from Atzmos Moshe, from the Eibishter himself, or the essence of the Jewish soul, the neshama, and it trickles down through Ishtalshalos to a series of steps that allow the ois to go min hakoyach ala poil, min hahelam ala gili, min ha'etem ala ispashtas, min ha'yuli ala gili. It reveals itself, it shows itself. But vessels come directly from God. In other words, and this is perhaps a little bit of a philosophy, infinity is two things. One and infinite. In light, the infinity shows itself in oneness. And in vessels, and in letters, and in words, infinity shows itself in infinity. There's infinite words and letters that exist in the soul, that exist in godliness, and they are distinct. And when they emerge, they're going to come out as individual letters, and it's not like a big letter produces a smaller letter, a higher letter produces a lower letter. Every one of these letters emerges directly from Atzmos Moshe, because they don't have babies. It's like coals. Coals don't have children. Coals don't divide, coals don't multiply, coals are coals. A rock is a rock. Now, what I just told you is true. However, if you learn Maimonides Chassidus, you will get, as teenagers love to say, confused, because so many Maimorim seem to suggest exactly the opposite of what I just said, including the Maimon that's in front of us here. But it's not a contradiction. What the Maimorim seem to describe is the idea that vessels emerge from light itself. The expression which is so frequently cited in Chassidus is, may his avus ha'er nasa kli, as the light becomes more dense, less fine, less lofty, less refined, and more basic, more brought down, more revealed, which means diminished, the vessels emerge. And you get the impression that vessels simply emerge from light itself, as if light begats vessels. Then there's a whole complicated discussion that it doesn't come from the light, it comes from the source of the light. But as you'll see in Mitzvah Hashem, as we actually read tonight's Shir inside with the help of God, of course. But what's clear is that the vessel seems to come from the Hishtalshus, from the light. And my argument, which is, like I said to you before, when I was preparing the Shir, I thought that this is the Pshat, but I had it confirmed when I looked in the Maamar the Mittel Rebbe, which is based on this Maamar here. That every os comes from Atzmos. Every letter, every vessel is created by God Himself. The vessels of Atzilus, the vessels of Bria, the vessels of Yetzirah, the vessels of Asiyah, the vessels of Ak. It's not the same vessels having babies. Every one of those vessels, every one of those words, every one of those garments comes directly from Atzmos and Hus, and in Atzmos it's distinct. But there's something called Hishtalshalus. Hishtalshalus basically means the delivery system, the pattern, the path through which it emerges. In other words, the reason there's no contradiction between the model that you seem to find all over Chassidus, that seems to describe that letters emerge from the light, and what I am saying is that every letter comes directly from God Almighty Himself, is because letters, the way they are in Atzmos, are so bottled that they don't exist. In Atzmos and Hus, you have Oir, but the light as it exists in Moir is Moir. In Atzmos and Hus, you have Keilim. And the Keilim as they exist in Atzmos and Hus are bottled, perhaps even more bottled than Oir is to Moir, because Atzmos, which is the Makar HaKeilim, is higher than Oir and Moir, like it says in Chassidus, in Ayin Beis, and Kama Makaimis. And at the same time, it's not a bittel of dveikos, it's a bittel of hedet tfisas makom. In other words, when the vessels are going to go through Seder Hishtalshalus, you will be able to say retroactively that although in Atzmos and Hus there was total bittel of Keilim to Atzmos and Hus, those Keilim were distinct, they existed as individual aspects. So Keilim is another world. Oisies is another world. Every world has vessels. You know why every world has vessels? For the same reason that my beam of light had particles. If you take away vessels from a world, the world disappears. Not the vessels disappear, the world disappears. Because a world is a juxtaposition of light and vessels. Or to say it slightly differently, a world is a revelation of light into vessels. Hidden light is not a world, it's hidden. And vessels are just dust. The fusion of light and vessels, the bringing together of Oyer and Kli, which of course happens through the process of the Tzimtzum. Before the Tzimtzum they were one. During the Tzimtzum they were separated, and after the Tzimtzum they reunited to create worlds. Is the juxtaposition, the shining of a light on a vessel. Because of the vessel, the light now shines. In other words, because of the vessel, the light now exists outside of the source. And because of the light, the vessel has a purpose. The vessel is ultimately able to reveal not only the Maila So'er, but the Maila Sakli, not only what's advantageous about the light which is shining in it, but how the vessel has a higher source, like it's explained at length in Chassidus. Tonight's discussion is not about both. Tonight's discussion is specifically about the vessels. And I want to add one more thing, which the Tzemach Tzedek actually brings in his notes on the Maamar, which we are not going to learn as we don't learn, because otherwise this Maamar would go on not 10 weeks, but 10 months. There is a question. It's a good question, actually. And the question is as follows. In Kabbalah, we speak of four. Yud, Kei, Vav, Kei. Chachma, Binas, Midas, Malchus, right? Everything goes in fours. In the Sefer Yetzirah, everything goes in threes. Eish, Avir, Mayim, Eish. Sefer, Sipur, and from the Bar Mitzvah Maamar and so forth. There's a Lashon, I think, someplace in Chassidus, which is originally from Tzemach Tzedek. Shal zeh nivna kol yosei Sefer Yetzirah. Sefer Yetzirah goes in threes. Everything is in three. So the Maimonides Chassidus ask, why standard Kabbalah goes in four, and the Kabbalah, the Sefer Yetzirah, goes in three. And they answer the question by quoting a Zohar. And the Zohar is in effect saying the same thing. And what the Zohar says, and I quote, this is found in Ranat, they also have it someplace in Reish and Hey, I believe. Kavish be'esha v'goled beruch. Kavish be'esha v'goled beruch means if you have water, in a pot and you light a fire. So when you have water in a pot and you light a fire, you have three elements. You have the fire, you have the water, and you have the oxygen. You have the ruach, the avir, the air. If there's no air, there's no fire. So when you were to take a pot of water and boil it, so the fire is boiling the water with the help of the gas, or the oxygen. What's missing? Offer. There's no earth. If you would boil that water until there was no water left in the pot, just boil it out completely. And of course, let the pot cool. You will find in the bottom of the pot dust particles. Those dust particles represent vessels. And they're the fourth. The fire, the wind, and the water represent three ideas, whatever it is, Chassidishe Parsha, whatever the case may be. The fourth is the vessel. But, simply by boiling the water, and when you had a cup full of water, you didn't see dirt or dust or particles. You had water, pure water. But when you boil the water until the water is completely gone, the dust emerges, and that's the fourth element. In other words, the difference between standard Kabbalah model and the Sefer Yetzirah's model is the standard Kabbalah model speaks of four, and the fourth would be Malchus, would be vessels. And the Sefer Yetzirah says no need to speak of it. Speak of the three lights, and from the three lights, Eish, Ruach, Mayim, Avar, Mayim, Eish, wind, water, and fire, the earth emerges automatically. This is an idea which is brought in many Maamar Chassidus. And what does it suggest? It's a Zohar originally. It suggests that vessels come from light. Well, I'm telling you, and I trust that you'll trust me, that that's the way it looks. It looks like vessels come from light. Because the Eibush desired vessels to be bottle in oil until their turn comes, until their world comes, until their level comes, where they emerge to be separate from oil, and not to become bottle to oil, but be makabel and magala oil. And though it appears like the vessel is emerging from the light, the truth of the matter is, nefesh malay oisius come from atzmos amos. Every vessel that will ever be, including every word and thought ever said or thought, every one of the letters that's represented in those discussions is a distinct creation from the Eibishter himself. But the way it's included in atzmos amos is totally bottle. In other words, if light represents the ultimate unity, vessels represent the ultimate division, and separation, and hiddenness, and concealment, and limitation, and so forth. The discussion we're having tonight is about vessels. The reason we're having this discussion about vessels is because the Alter Rebbe wants to further his commentary on the idea of Tzimtzum Shalei Kipshutei. The issue that we talked about 2 weeks ago and last week, I don't know if you remember, 2 weeks ago's class was essentially a lecture, and I talked about Tzimtzum. I read 5 words of the text. Talked about Tzimtzum, and we also talked about Tzimtzum Shalei Kipshutei. Last week we read what we were supposed to read the week before, and amongst other things, we touched on a mashal and an illustration, an example of a Tzimtzum Shalei Kipshutei. Tonight, this Perek Dalet, and I believe it's the entirety of Perek Dalet, the Rebbe wishes to discuss further the idea of Tzimtzum Shalei Kipshutei. Understand, Tzimtzum Shalei Kipshutei means godliness is here and we don't see it. The proposal that the Maamar is going to give is a simple one. Godliness is here, but it's not connecting to the vessels. And therefore it's not revealed. And therefore to you it's hidden. But in reality it is here just as much as ever. It's only a world when it's revealed in the vessels. It's only present when you can experience it. When godliness is here, but for some reason it's not linking to the vessel, and when you read the Mittel Rebbe's Maamar, he suggests because the vessels were removed from the Makam HaCholol, so the light is here and we don't see it, so we see it Tzimtzum. And that's what Perek Dalet of this Maamar is about. He talks about Isis, talks about letters and words. And I gave you what I think is a pretty comprehensive commentary on Isis. We use this as opportunity to discuss Keilim, just like in the earlier classes we used the opportunity to discuss Oir. We use tonight as an opportunity to discuss Keilim. And we're going to be discussing Keilim, how Keilim develop, and I'm reminding you again that although the Maamar may say something that appears different, you should know that ultimately Keilim are mushrish and atzmos. The hishtalshus is only the pattern that the Maamar describes. And that a world is when the light shines and is revealed and is defined by vessel. And Tzimtzum Shalei Kipshutei means that the light is present and the vessel is present, but they're not meeting. Now, if this was a live class, I would say any questions or comments. It's not a live class, but I'll say any questions or comments, you're welcome to type them in and send them. And if you're fortunate enough that the editor at theyeshiva.net will deem your question worthy, it'll go up. And if you're even more fortunate, I'll read it and actually respond. But let's start. Let's read. Line 295. Lehavin Mah Shekasuv. I wish, as Alter Rebbe, to explain the idea of Tzimtzum Shleikei further. How we could say that godliness is completely present in the space that has been evacuated for creation. And therefore, the worlds exist in a sea of Ein Sof, and yet it's hidden. We don't see it. It says, the Rebbe, we have to explore further the idea of letters. Now, last week we talked about Yossi. But last week we explained what it means, Tzimtzum Shleikei Pshuta, using a metaphor from a person who has gone away from a certain conversation, who can quickly retrieve it using the words. As long as an idea has words, you can bring it back. Here the Rebbe talks about a little bit different idea. Not how you can bring it back to the words, how the words have been separated from the idea, and when the words become separated from the idea vanishes, and the words become meaningless. The idea becomes included in the source of all ideas, the light becomes included in the source of all light, and the vessels become meaningless. Ki, the source of the 22 letters of the alphabet, they come from Chokhmah, which is a high level. Now, how many letters are there? There are infinite letters. But all the infinity of levels and all the infinity of letters and all the infinity of levels come down to 22 sounds, 22 oisies. They emerge as creations. At the very end, the very lowest level of Chokhmah, you see letters. In other words, when a person has an idea on a very abstract level, they're so focused on the idea that the letters that are involved in that thought process are completely hidden. And when you explain it better, bring it to a lower level, you start to pay attention and notice that there are words or visual images that are carrying the idea that you're understanding. Like the essence, like the reduced, the distilled form, a version of Chokhmah comes down to letters. Now when the Rebbe says over here Chokhmah, he doesn't mean ideas, he means the source of ideas. Chokhmah means the creative potential, the intuition. Bina means ideas. Chokhmah is higher than ideas. Chokhmah means the potential for ideas. And the argument of the Maamar is that letters are rooted in Chokhmah. Now I told you letters are rooted in Atzmos, but this is how they're mishtalshel. They go through the various steps from the source of Seichel, higher than the Seichel itself, or to say it more applied, higher than the Madreg of the Makar, of the Oira Seichel, the Oisius exist in Chokhmah. Like it says in Tanya. Now I must of course observe the obvious. Igeres HaKedesh Dibra Maschal V'Yaz David Chaim was added to the Tanya after the Alter Rebbe passed away. So there's no way the Alter Rebbe said these words. The Tzemach Tzedek wrote them, which leads me to believe that this is really the Tzemach Tzedek's Maamar. He wrote down what the Alter Rebbe said and he explained it. He wrote extensive, lengthy notes, which we are of course skipping, but some of the thoughts that there are the Tzemach Tzedek's are incorporated into the original text, and this is obviously an example. Says the Rebbe, do not think that letters come from the vocal cords. The vocal cords sound them out, but the ability to create those sounds. And you see, when you talk about letters, there's several aspects. One aspect of letters is the sounds themselves, the individual, what we would call in Sefer Yitzhak language, avonim, individual pebbles, individual words. The second is called the tziruf. Tziruf means you join, you fuse letters together to create words. And then you fuse words together to create sentences, and sentences to create paragraphs, and so forth. Animals are capable of communication, but they're not capable of speech. And there's been many studies done where they've demonstrated a gorilla and a orangutan that had as many as 400 words in their vocabulary. And I read some of it. I mean, I'm no big expert, but I read a little bit. And what I discovered is that the chimpanzee, the gorilla, and the orangutan doesn't create words. Every word is a picture, every word is an idea. And his ability to join, to create methods of communication by showing on a picture and touching his heart indicate that he's in pain, for example. There was a Coco, the gorilla, had a little cat that was run over by a car. And the gorilla was able to communicate sadness. It's quite incredible. He was able to communicate mourning for the loss of his buddy, the cat. And what he did was he pointed at a picture of the cat and he pointed to his heart. So he was communicating. He was actually creating a sentence. Heart is one thing, cat is another thing. He drew them together and he used it as a vehicle of communication. But what he's doing is really joining a picture in a picture. What makes speech unique is that words are not ideas. They're fluid and they're flexible and they're plastic and they're replaceable and interchangeable. And this is a unique gift that God has given mankind, who is called Medaber, that he can not only communicate, but he can communicate with words, which means a human being can create an infinite variety of different forms of communication, because every word and every letter and every possible form can be used differently and so on and so forth, as opposed to simply using individual words like pictures. You can put a picture next to a picture next to a picture and communicate something, but that's much, much more limited. Words have a certain infinity about them. This is the gift of Medaber, which God Almighty gave distinctly to humanity. So the first idea is the fact that every individual letter exists from Atzmos. Then there's the Koyach HaTziruf, the power of fusing words together, letters and words together to create words and sentences and so forth. And the third, of course, is the joining of the words with the idea. Now, when you look at these three things, your initial impression is that the highest idea is the joining of the words with the idea, because words by themselves are like stones. They have no meaning. Joining words with an idea makes it intelligent. It makes the stone into a diamond. The tziruf, the joining different letters to create words, is less sophisticated than when the words are joined to ideas, but it's more sophisticated than individual pebbles, individual stones, which are individual letters. But in fact, the exact opposite is true. The highest thing is the oisias, because oisias are Moshe Shekasuv. But it's Helam and Avdallah. You don't see the godliness of an individual letter. The second highest thing is the Koyach HaTziruf, and the lowest thing is the linking of words to ideas. And I don't have time to explain it and to elaborate, but you can look up Maimonim and Tafresh and Test, and it's not whatever it is, Sukkot and Simchas Torah, where oisias are discussed at length. The point that the Rebbe makes is words don't come from the vocal cords. Words come from the soul. Vocal cords deliver them. The real source of the ability to create the sounds which join together to create words and sentences and so forth is from a hidden potential, a creative power which is in the neshama, from which they emerge. As they pass through the vocal cords, so that the idea of the distinct letters and words takes on amplification, sound that you can articulate, and voice. But the idea that you're speaking words, that I am speaking words, and every one of these individual words is made up of a bunch of individual letters, and every individual letter has a particular shape and a particular sound and a particular definition, which Atzmos and Hus determined, this comes from someplace much, much higher than the idea itself. Which is why we speak of letters having both a substance and a form. The substance is the sound itself, and the form, in this particular case, is the Koyach HaTziruf, the joining different letters to create words and sentences and so forth. Line 302 now. That's why it's only 22 letters. Now, I am really completely ignorant about sounds. There's something called phonetics. I had a student, more than one student, who had trouble with reading. People who have dyslexic issues struggle with seeing words, and they teach them phonetics. And from what I understood from one of my students, there's a grand total of 44 sounds. That's it. We have 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet, and it comes down to 44 sounds. And apparently in every language it's that way. There are no more sounds. Languages can add nuance and subtlety to the sounds, but the number of sounds you can produce is only a very, very limited number. And to give you an example, just for the purposes of being provocative, we have 22 letters, right? But we have what's called oises kfulis, a bays and a vase, a gimel and a j, a gimel, a dalet and a th, a dalet, and so forth. I don't know all the subtleties and the nuances, and of course us Ashkenazim have absolutely butchered the Hebrew language, but Taman and Yemenites pronounce so many more sounds than we do, but it's still a limited number of sounds. And every one of those sounds represents a letter, a shape, and a form produced by Atzmos and Hus. And if you say the same sound 10 times, the sound is the same. Every one of those enunciations, God in Atzmos already possessed, and as you say it, you're bringing it out, you're revealing it, because you're creating a distinct sound which exists from now forever as a distinct entity. Notwithstanding there were 70 different languages, The sounds themselves are international. How the sounds are joined together to make words, and what those words mean is distinctive, is various, is diverse, but the sounds themselves are very narrow. It's only 22 letters or thereabouts. The emergence of letters, the manifesting of vessels and sounds and words. To bring out one or a variety of the 22 sounds or shapes of letters. From the way they're hidden in the creative source of ideas. But at the very end, the lowest level of Chokhmah. In other words, Chokhmah is the source, the creative power of Chokhmah is the source of ideas. And the lowest level of those ideas are the words which reveals the Chokhmah. What happens if you have the most brilliant idea in the world, but you can't speak? What happens if you have the most brilliant idea in the world and you cannot think? You don't have the idea. Because if you don't have those little tiny particles that dirty your beam of light, the light vanishes. So the letters conduct and bring forward the light. In other words, the letters which are distinct and various create distinct and various different lights. And if there's no vessels, the light disappears. The letters are the residue, the leftover of the idea, which then becomes a vessel, to reveal it. So this paragraph says exactly what I told you not. This paragraph is saying that oisius come from oir. What I told you is different. I told you oisius and they emerge, they're mishtalshel through oir. And as I said to you before, what I told you is true. It says in Chassidus. It says even in the Middle Rebbe's version of our very, very Maamar, where the Middle Rebbe adds ideas that the Alter Rebbe doesn't touch on. It is only that the hishtalshelus, the way they come down, is through it. 312 says the Rebbe. There's two levels of letters. But letters of thought, letters of speech. I want you to know. There aren't two levels of letters. There's infinite number of levels of letters. There's letters in Atzilus, letters in Bria, letters in Yetzirah, letters in Asiyah, letters in the Ein Sof worlds. There are so many different levels of letters. Each world has its own level. Moreover, within each world there may be various levels, and they're distinct. He generalizes and says two, because two is enough. By saying two, he's saying many. How many is a detail? It's not that there's one set of letters that gets replicated and repeated and re-represented at another level. Every set of levels has its own reality. And he explains later in the Maamar, thought is the production of speech, and speech is considered thought compared to the next speech, and so forth. But I remind you for time number, 64, that although higher letters produce lower letters, they're simply revealing the lower letters, but the Sheda Sheshes is not. Says the Rebbe, letters of thought, madayan remain still, hidden, unmanifest. They're also spiritual, in other words, when you speak, the letters that you say are attached to oxygen, to air, that comes from your lung, and that's the physical substance of the sounds you're producing. Like the material, the stuff of letters of speech. Shukel Gashmi, its physical voice, which is made up according to Kabbalah and Chassidus of Eish Maim Ruach. Sound has no offer. Hayetim Agon coming out of the throat and so forth. While letters of thought don't have hevel, don't have physical substance, this material and substance isn't letters of thought, it's ruchnim, it's more spiritual. Now I want you to know that in Chassidus, you have the second chilik of Ayin Beis, and I think you have it also in the Beauty of for the Middle Rebbe, you have it in Kama Makemis, that we always say that oisius come from the lev. Letters come from the heart. Just like when a person speaks, the sounds come from the vocal cords, but the amplification, the power, the passion comes from the heart. It says in Kabbalah that something called Pnimiyas Halev, the inner heart, which is the thought of Eisis HaMachshava, letters of thought. What this means, I don't know. But the fact that this is written is reason to take stock, to take pause, to think about it. The connection between letters and the heart is not simply the fact that it's passion in words. It's much more meaningful, much more deep. And accordingly, all oisias and all levels are connected to the midas and they emerge through them. As opposed to this material stuff. As it is in letters of thought, they're spiritual. And later on, from the thought. It's drawn down and revealed in letters of thought. Speech, pardon me. And bepashtus, it seems like the letters of thought are becoming the letters of speech. But I'm here to tell you that in Emerson there's two different sets of Eisias, and the Eisias Adibar are emerging from a hidden state through the Eisias HaMachshava. It's the same letters. The letters of thought and the letters of speech are the same, and again, they look the same, one comes from the next, but they're distinctive. Thought is spiritual, and speech is physical. Let me share this with you. This you have takin and anat. Yes. It says in Chassidus, there's letters on every level of the neshama, every level of the neshama. There's letters of tainu, there's level of ratzon, level of chokhmah, pinimi bina, chiteni bina, all levels. In Tanya, chapter 20, at the end, it says, what it says here? There's two levels of letters, thought and speech. So which is it? And of course the answer to that question is there are many, many levels of letters, but on the higher levels the oisias are bilti murgoshim, the letters are less sensed, less aware, and the lower levels the oisias become more pronounced. And I'll give you a simple example, and of course this is discussed in the Hemshech Tafresh and Test in detail. What happens when a person speaks? They prepare themselves, they plan, they anticipate. When a person speaks and they anticipate and they plan, they don't only prepare what they're going to say, they prepare how they're going to say it. They anticipate how they're going to look, right? The expression that is so terrible that says always sacrifice substance for form. Which means a public speaker doesn't only concern himself with what he's going to say, but how he's going to say it. Which means he's not only paying attention to his ideas, he's paying attention to his words. What about when a person thinks? There's no such thing as a public thinker, is there? Right? Everybody thinks for themselves. And accordingly, when you think for yourself, how you sound is immaterial as long as you understand yourself. In other words, in thought, there is no attention paid to the letters, to the words, just to the ideas that are being conducted by the letters and the words. In speech, enormous amount of attention is paid to the words themselves. And accordingly, Chassidus holds that there's an incredible tzimtzum between machshava and dibur. There's an incredible chasm between thought and speech. Thought, since in thought, the words, the ideas are the entire focus, and you don't concern yourself with how the words and thoughts sound, because you're thinking them to themselves, you say that the oisias are bottled. The letters are completely secondary to the ideas. In speech, since you focus on the words themselves, the words become more of a material. This is an enormous tzimtzum. And the same is true higher and higher from level to level. Really, this is time number 67 and a half. Every osas Moshe Shanatzmos. But as it passes through Hishtalshalos, they emerge at different points from a hidden state to a revealed state as per Machshava and Dibur. And that's the meaning of this paragraph. Line 318. And this is the Maamar Amuzga. This is the parenthesis. Umikan techachas magula la machishem beruchnis nefesh. This is an obvious proof to discredit those who deny the spirituality of the soul. Read that again. Umikanan from here, techachas magula is an overt and obvious proof la machishem to those who deny ruchnis nefesh, the spirituality of the soul. What does this mean? There are people who deny the spirituality of the soul. What do they think of the soul? A piece of chopped meat. What is the soul? Tell you something controversial. Rasag, Rabbi Yigon, he wrote a sefer called Amunas V'Deis. And one of the issues that he grapples with, that he struggles with, is the question of Chomer Kadman, which is something that the Rambam also deals with. Chomer Kadman means is the material of creation a creation, or is the material of creation Kadman, always existed? And that the Creator simply is taking primordial material and matter and giving it order and form. All the ancient philosophers, Aristotle, all the rest, they believed in Yesh Mi'ayin being Nimna. You know, there's some other classes. In other words, they held that the stuff of creation always existed, and God is only a creator in the sense of giving order to disorderly stuff, disorderly matter, disorderly atoms. You know what word Rabbi Gaon uses to describe this what they call the Greek atom? The word Rabbi Gaon chooses to use to describe the Greek atom is the word haruchni. The Greek atoms are physical particles that are very tiny. How small? They can't be smaller. And all of matter is made up of those Greek atoms. They coalesce as they collect into larger and larger, more complicated bodies. The original point is called ruchni. That's how the word ruchni is used here. When it says here, mikante chachas megula la'makishim beruchni shebenefesh, he doesn't mean that the soul exists. He means that the soul has personality, has character, has form. And the personality and character and form of the soul is the words, is the body. The soul has a body. In other words, what's to separate your soul from God? God is the soul of all souls. Your soul is a part of God. Your soul is attached to God. How is it distinct? And the answer is because just like your soul is in a body, your soul itself has a form, has a body. We've got mitzias of the mahus, a chomer of the tzura. That form is the definition of your soul. And he says, "Omikan." Alter Rebbe says, "What I mean here, teichachas megula, explicit, overt proof against la makchish and baruch nefesh, they denied the spirituality of the soul. This means they deny the distinctive personality of the soul. The soul either does not exist, or it's a part of God. Says the philosophers, no. Says Chassidus, no. Souls are beings, they're entities, they're personalities. What makes them distinct? They have a body. Not a physical body, a metaphysical body. What is the body? The words and the letters, or the particles inside the beam of light that make it shine. What makes one soul separate from another soul? Not the ideas, not the spirituality, it's form. And it's form of the Yossi. So the Rebbe says there is reality to spirituality. Understand, when the Alter Rebbe says reality to spirituality, it doesn't mean light and it doesn't mean life. You know why? Because light and life don't have reality. Light is a reflection of the source. Inside the source is nothing other than light. The very fact that light emerges from a source and exists and can be conducted is because of vessels. Take away vessels, light vanishes. And the same is true of life. When it says here, Teichachas megula beruchnias hanefesh, to prove that the soul has a spiritual reality, he means a spiritual body, a spiritual representation that makes it distinct from every other spiritual body and distinct from the source of all spiritualities, namely God. This is the Yossi. Even in physical people, we see a concept of letters that are not physical. Like thought. V'gam, moreover, shekol inyan amshachas ha'esius b'hadibur. One produces words of speech to communicate thoughts. You should know, einei me'asech ala musik. Those words and those letters are not coming from the idea, they're coming from the soul. The idea is revealing it, they're coming from the soul. Skip the rest of that line. So oisios exist. Oisios exist as distinct entities. They give distinctness to the life and the light. They make the neshama exist separate from other neshamas, separate from the Eibishter. And their real source is Atzmos. Line 321. Ubemok amach and is by it. Another place it explains just as there are 22 letters of speech in the soul, Shem Tzuris, which are the theoretical forms of Chav Beis Asius, of these 22 letters. Now remember, sounds so not like what I told you. 22 letters is not infinity, but I'm telling you that there's infinite number of each of these 22 letters. The same is true also the 20 letters of thought. Yeshlem Gamkin Sherish also have a root, and he adds the word Bifnei Atzmei. Speech is not a reduced thought, it's a different kind of letter. And thought is not a reduced emotion, it's a different kind of letter. An emotion is not a different kind of idea, it's a different kind of letter. An idea is not a reduced intuition, it's a different kind of an idea. An intuition is not a reduced will, it's a different kind of an idea. And will is not a reduced delight, it's a different kind of an idea. And so forth. Mah Shekasuv is and he brings another Maamar. So, Yossi exist in the nefesh. Before I speak, letters exist. And my speech is emerging those letters, bringing them forward. And they exist on all levels. And he continues on line 324. V'hine. Shnei bechinas elu de machshava v'dibur. These two concepts of thought and speech, yesh madruma malas. It's not two, but many times two. You know why? Because there's so many levels of thought and speech. And take v'sharsha and beis hey and the shem havaya. Their original source are the two letters in the divine name of God, which are Beis Meyaldeis Ha'ivrius, the two sources of Hebrew letters. Hainu Ha'melides Ha'oisis, that produce letters. Shekasuv as the pasuk, and you have letters in every level. And he brings proof from a pasuk in Tanakh. Shekasuv, the pasuk says, "V'kara zal zel yamav again." The malachim are calling one another. They're speaking. Kum tachayis arayesh b'chinas dibur b'malachim al yenim. Angels also speak. That af she'ein lahem etois apeh gashmi. They don't have physical vocal cords. V'adibur shalahem vadai. Their speech is certainly ruchni, spiritual. In fact, it's k'may erech eisis hamachshava sheba'adam. The nature of the speech of the angels is as refined as the thought of a person, or even more. Because since the soul of a person is in a physical body, even the spiritual aspect of that soul within a body is more coarse than a soul without a body. Angels are removed from any kind of form, and therefore their ability to think and feel and speak is much more edel than our speech. It's still true that even angels speak. And you know what else speaks? Atzilus speaks. You know what the speech of Atzilus is? The vessels that reveal the light. And you know what else? Ak speaks. You know what the speech of Adam Kadmon is? The Keilim of Adam Kadmon that are conducting the light. And to be sure, even lifnei Tzimtzum, you have such a concept of Gilu. You have a similar Gemara in Brachas that speaks about Shtei Ruchas Mesapezuzu, two spirits, two demons, two Shadim, two Nefashis communicating with one another. How could one soul speak to another soul? With words. So words exist spiritually as well. Accordingly, in each world, there's thought and speech, and what is considered thought in one world, which is higher than speech. And their actual speech, even the letters of speech of the angels is more spiritual. It's similar to or more edel than the thought of a person. So when we said earlier in the Maamar that there's two levels of letters, that's a generalization. There's at least two letters of level, but those two are many, many times. Machshava to one word is deeper to the next. And remember again, this is time number 69 and 3/4. This is the only way it emerges. In reality, every osas musha shenatmos, helam and avdol and agbalas chalkas is the trademark of Asis. Accordingly, you have so many levels and different categories of letters. Speech in a higher world is thought to a lower world. And of course, thought in a higher world becomes speech in the lower world. Same is true in the 10 spheres. That is the level of Malchus of Atzilus. Which is the sort of speech, nasis in Atzilus, nasis atik u'moker chabad debriya, is the source of the highest level in El Mabriya, which is much higher than thought. And he brings again the source with the Maimah of Ati Lokei Echad. Says the Rebbe, V'hinei keinu adram miles. To be sure, in every world there's letters, and those letters seem to go from world to world in a begotten fashion. The lower world is created by the letters of the higher world. But believe me, that's the way it appears. Every osas musha shenatzmos. To be sure, there are letters. All over Hishtashlos there are Asis. Now let me pause. Okay. There are Maamar Chasidis that are mitzayin to biur alda yeviu levush malchus ksav yad harap zal. That's a holy quote. Maamar Chasidis that make reference to a commentary of the Alter Rebbe on a Maamar written by the Chassid of Pinchas Reizes. There's an entire volume of Chasidis, which I believe they reprinted now, the whole set of the Alter Rebbe's Maamarim, and that would be included, called Hanochas Harap. Maamar Admon Hazak and Hanochas Harap. One of the earliest Maamarim of Chasidis that the Rebbe printed in the 50s yet. Rap is Rab Pinchas. The Alter Rebbe didn't write his own Chasidus. There were 5 people who transcribed his Maamarim. And the Alter Rebbe was very, very picky about who and how they transcribed. Who were his transcribers? His brother, 2 of his sons, the Mittler Rebbe and the Moshe, his grandson, the Tzemach Tzedek, who were all family, and the Pinchas Reizes. Pinchas Shklov, Pinchas Shik. And he was the favorite of the Alter Rebbe. Tzemach Tzedek makes reference to him here in these footnotes. And the reason is because he used to write the word of the Alter Rebbe verbatim, word for word. And there is a Maamar of the Pinchas Reizes where he makes a very interesting observation. And I don't want to get carried away with this because I don't have time, and you don't have time. And I think I've shared with you so much information, you need a little bit of digestion here, downtime. There is an absolute rule that says revelation equals reveille. You cannot reveal something unless it's to something else. In other words, light does not shine unless there's a vessel. So light and vessels are an interplay. They're a relationship. They're like the soul and the body. No body, no soul. Now, when you say no body, no soul, you don't mean there isn't a soul. You mean there's no revelation of the soul. There's a theoretical soul. When you say if there's no vessels, there's no light, you don't mean there's no light, there's no revealed light. There's theoretical light. So the criteria for revelation is dependent on another criteria. And that criteria is duality, too. You can only have revelation if you have two separate things, light and vessel. Light shines to vessel, the meaning creates the revelation. When does duality start? Where in Ishtalshlus was the division of light and vessels established, so that when you reunite light and vessels, it's an interplay, it's an exchange, it's a relationship between two things that produces a compromise, a revelation. And of course the answer is Tzimtzum Adishon, the first Tzimtzum. What about before the Tzimtzum Adishon? Oh no, before the Tzimtzum Adishon there was only one. So the Alter Rebbe asks a klotz kasha, a very simple question. When you study Kabbalah, and of course this is really more Chassidus than Kabbalah on these higher levels, and we talk about godliness before the original Tzimtzum, before Tzimtzum Adishon, we speak about various levels, right? And again, I always make reference to the Basi Lagani that everybody knows. The first page of Chassidus that Rebbe ever said, Basi Lagani 1951, Tafshin Aleph, he brings 3 levels of godliness Lifnei Tzimtzum. And the second level and the third level are called Gilui. And the Alter Rebbe says, how can you have a Gilui if you have no duality? If the beginning of the division of light and vessels is the Tzimtzum Adishon, and when you later reunite light and vessels, it's a meeting of two separate things, and therefore you can produce an interaction, a revelation. And before the Tzimtzum Adishon, Keach HaGvul and Keach HaBli were one. So how could there be a concept, even in theory, of a revelation, Lifnei Tzimtzum, if there's no duality? And the answer in short is that it's called Halos Man Minei Ubei. Ke'adein kamtza de levushe minei ubei. That means, before the Tzimtzum, God anticipated what's going to be after the Tzimtzum. And on a lower level, He desired what's going to be after the Tzimtzum. The moment Hashem wanted that there should be a Tzimtzum, and there should be a separation from vessels and light, so that when a vessel would be reunited with the light would shine into the vessel and through the vessel. So in Lifnei HaTzimtzum, the vessel aspect of the Ein Sof and the light aspect of the Ein Sof became sufficiently separate that you could use the word Gilui. It's called a Gilui in area. There's a revelation and there's no real Zulas. The other entity which is needed for the light to shine against, to reflect off, to be in what we call a state of Gilui, was one with the light. But one with the light in such a way that it was separate enough for the light to have a level of revelation. And this is called Spheres Agnuzis, 10 hidden spheres. And before Allah Saratzen, it's called Spheres and Ketz. And that's the big chiddush of that Maamar. The beer on Yidal, Yevilu, Vushmachas, Ksavyat Harab Zal. It's printed in the Hosafos of that Sefer. It's brought in a lot of places in Chassidus, is that there's something called infinite spheres. To have infinite spheres, you have to have parts. What's the infinite parts? The anticipation of vessels in Lifnei Tzimtzum. So once the Eibusha chose 10 spheres, you're anticipating 10 vessels. But those 10 vessels were chosen from theoretical infinite number of spheres. Before the Eibusha had that Ratzon, there's infinite number of theoretical vessels of which the light is going to shine. And that's what we have, a Gilul Atzma, which is the Shvil Atzma, which is the Mokar of Sevav Kalalman. It's the idea that you have Spheres and Ketz. And the Spheres and Ketz are Minei Ubei. They were never separate from the light. What that means, Rabbi Isai, and the reason I'm saying this, is to make the case that the idea that there is thought and speech, as our Maamar generalizes, exists not only in us, and in Atzilus, and in Lifnei Tzimtzum. Before the Tzimtzum, there's already a notion of speech and thought. But in Lifnei Tzimtzum, speech and thought means the light is juxtaposed against a letter of thought or a letter of speech in such a way that it was never separated and rejoined It was always one, but it was rattled, it was shaken, it was affected in its unity to be sufficiently separated without being separated. So we speak about revelation. So the Rebbe, this concept that I just mentioned to you now, which is that before the Tzimtzum, light and vessel never separated. And if before the Tzimtzum, light and vessel never separated, they cannot be joined back together. If they cannot be joined back together, there's no revealer and revealee. So there shouldn't be Gilui Lifnei HaTzimtzum. There should be no notion of godliness being revealed prior to the Tzimtzum, but that's not true. There is. How could there be revelation before the Tzimtzum if the light and vessel were never separated? And the answer is they were partially separated within themselves. And this is actually stepping stones to the full separation of Tzimtzum Adishan. But the second and third Madrega of Ein Sof Lifnei HaTzimtzum is levels where the godliness is begilui minei ubei. Kadein comes to the levushe minei ubei. This means that although the light and vessels never fully separated, within the light, which has within itself the potential for vessels, there was enough of a separation for the light to be shining on those vessels and be revealed without being fully separated. Now who cares? Right? 1 hour and 11 minutes and 48 seconds into a class. Who really cares? I'll tell you what the answer is. Look at Sifhei. Line 374. V'hinei. Al pi mashal zeh. If you take this analogy to its extreme, and the extreme, of course, is that you have letters of thought, you have letters of speech, and it's not only 2 levels of letters, it's an infinite number of levels. And thought and speech are just a generalization. And that in each world, letters emerge, and light reflects off those letters to create a revelation in a world. Yecholim onu lahaskil ktsas. Says the Rebbe, this offers a model of understanding in Inyan HaTzimtzum, the idea of the first Tzimtzum. Now remember, the first Tzimtzum is the point at which light and vessels were truly separated for the first time. Before the original Tzimtzum, light and vessels had never been separated. No. So if light and vessel had never been separated, that means that before the Tzimtzum, there should be no concept of revelation. Says the Rebbe, but we hold Tzimtzum shaloi kipshut. We hold that Tzimtzum, the light that existed prior to the Tzimtzum, still exists in Makam HaCholol. The difference only is that before the Tzimtzum, the light was revealed, and as a result of the Tzimtzum, the light is hidden. How could the light have been revealed before the Tzimtzum if there was no vessels? And the answer at Rabbi is what I just told you. Even Lifnei HaTzimtzum, in the Madrega of Alei Saratzin, in the Madrega before Alei Saratzin, there was a concept of Gili Minei Ubei. So you know what Tzimtzum Adishan means, says Alter Rebbe? You're not removing the light. You're separating the light from the vessels. That's it. What happens if you separate the light from the vessels, Lifnei HaTzimtzum? It goes dark. Right? What happens when your flashlight has no particles to create a beam? It goes dark. Where has the light gone? No place. Now the Mittel Rebbe says this, the Keilim, the Oisius when nostalgic, which is a very backwards version of Tzimtzum Adishan, because we always see Tzimtzum Adishan as the emergence of Keilim, but okay. When you don't allow this union of light and vessel, which was never really separated, it was only partially separated so that it should be united in a way of revelation within itself. If you separate the light aspect of the Ein Sof from the vessel aspect of the Ein Sof, the Gilui vanishes and nothing moved any place. The light is present, the vessel is present, the revelation is gone. That's Tzimtzum Adishan. That's it. So what changed? The relationship between the light and the vessels. That's all. Hainu helam ha'erev ha'chayis, to hide the light in the life, not to remove it. Simply, kishe'enei meir u'mizgala al yedei, when it ceases to shine and reveal itself through ha'oisiyat shalai, her letters, his letters, its letters. And remember, Tzimtzum Adishan is talking about oisiyas lifnei HaTzimtzum. And lifnei HaTzimtzum don't really have a separation of oisiyas lifnei. It's only a separation minei ubei. And this separation minei ubei allowed for their union to be in a state of gilui. When you take away this reunification, you have helam. Like the example we discussed last week, that when you stop thinking about Masechta Shabbos, you didn't forget the oisius, the oil was removed from the oisius, and you can very easily retrieve it. So the Alter Rebbe here says, you want an example for Tzimtzum Shekasuv, just think about it. The light didn't move, the vessels didn't move, the relationship was altered. So in regard to the Makam HaChol, in regard to the Yossis, there's a Helam. This sets the stage for the Chazer V'Heir and the Kav, which we'll talk about in Mitzvah Hashem and later Shiyah.